Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that's both true and beautiful. I'm your host, Liz Busby. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy, a reviewer of books, and a Latter-day Saint. And with me today is Carl.
Hey everybody, my name is Carl Cranny. I have a PhD in religion, and I've written on the intersection of religious themes and pop culture, and I'm happy to be back once again.
Yeah, we may have to make Carl a co-host. He's been here so often.
Yeah, me too.
And we also have Ivan with us today. Will you introduce yourself?
I'm Ivan Wolf. I teach English at Arizona State University, and I publish a lot in philosophy and pop culture books. So my most recent one was on The Princess Bride in philosophy. So about that more on Aristotle.
Oh, nice. Nice. Aristotle's great. That
He's
would
a
be
moron.
Well, okay. True. True.
Well, only compared to Vizzini.
Yes, true. Yes.
Of course. Okay, so we always open with our best books segment, where each of us recommends something we're reading, watching, or listening to right now. My recommendation today kind of goes with what we're going to talk about today, but it's a book called The Cunning Man by D.J. Butler and Aaron Michael Ritchie. It is a fantasy novel set in 1930s Utah. And it poses that seer stones are magical, and there's lots of shaking hands with familiar spirits, and just takes the folklore of early Mormonism and turns it into a magic system in Utah. And it's really fascinating, and I think it goes well with the piece of media we're going to talk about today. Carl, what have you got for us?
So I actually have something that I'm going to formally warn people away from and not recommend. Well, or rather, half and half. I am a Critical Role fan, and I have been for some years now. For those of you who don't know what that is, a couple of years ago, a bunch of voice actors who were playing Dungeons and Dragons decided to start streaming their game, and it went gangbusters. Like last year, they were the #1 Twitch streamer on the entire platform. They make millions of dollars just playing Dungeons and Dragons, and because they're all voice actors, yeah, it's crazy. But it's like long form improv storytelling in a fantasy world. Like it is really amazing to watch their stream. But they recently launched The Legend of Vox Machina based on their first campaign. It's like the #2 or 3 show on Amazon Prime right now because they have connections in the industry, of course. They could easily they did a Kickstarter that made like $11 or $12 million, and they funded a show based on their first campaign. And it's terrible. I do not. I mean, the animation is great. The storyline is fun. The voice acting is amazing. But when there's like maybe a couple of hours of naughty shenanigans in like a 400-hour campaign, you can deal with that. When you have a 4-hour TV show and there's 1 hour of naughty shenanigans, it ruins the whole thing. And so I'm officially not recommending it. I did go read their comic books. I do recommend those. Those are much more fun, and there aren't naughty shenanigans in them. So there's my take there.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. My boys are super into Dungeons and Dragons too. So maybe the comic books, not the show. Got it.
Yeah, not the TV show. The stream you will have mixed results on.
Yeah. But it's improv, so.
But it is, yeah. So it's just it's 3 very different mediums, all trying to tell the same story, and it works well in 2 of them. It would have worked well had they not allowed the one character to just be so raunchy all the time in the TV show. So there you have it.
Mm-hmm.
That's frustrating. Ivan, do you have something for us today?
Yes, I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong. Apologies to anybody out there who actually speaks Japanese. But I've been reading a lot of Japanese texts in translation lately, and currently I'm on the Hagakure, Hagakure. I probably totally butchered that, and I'm going to get hate mail now. But it's a book of samurai wisdom that was actually considered lost for a while, and just it's just really fascinating. A lot of stuff that's like really great advice, like, when you feel like you're in contention, just go home and think of poetry instead. Don't get in arguments. It's like, okay, that's probably a good idea. But then there's also like, daughters are terrible, don't have any, and if you do, just ignore them. So it's like, okay, wait, So it's just this really interesting like back and forth of like how to be a samurai, but just sort of a picture into a different world and window. So I'm enjoying it a lot. So
Interesting to see which things are timeless and which things are not so much.
yeah.
That's interesting.
I read the Benedict option, sorry, the Saint Benedict's, not the Benedict option, the book, but the actual book by Saint Benedict on how to run a Christian monastery, and it was really interesting to see like, oh, this is some pretty like stuff that is useful for us Christians in 2022, and then other stuff I was like, probably not going to incorporate that particular way of reading the Psalms daily into my life because I'm not a Benedictine monk. So
you're not going to get up and pray, sing the chant 7 times a day.
Yep.
Never get more than like 2 hours of sleep at a time. Sounds good.
There's the life for you. Oh man. Well, so our main topic today, we're talking about the film Noah, that was released in 2014 about Noah and the flood. I hadn't seen this one before Carl brought it up as a good idea to do for a podcast, and I loved it. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. Probably because it has a little bit of a fantasy flair to it, I feel like. It feels...
Yeah, there was one critic, it's funny, is because it actually convinced me to watch it. He was actually trying to tear the movie apart, and he actually, most of the review, he just shreds it. But at the beginning, he said, if you want material for a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, this is a good movie to watch. And I was like, okay, I'm sold. So
it's like
it really does, though.
Someone trying to convince you and using the exact wrong argument. That's perfect. I mean, I recommended it because I sort of came to it sight unseen. I went and saw it in the theater with my stake president at the time, and he didn't really like it. And I was a little iffy on it, but it was only afterwards when I like went and read up on these things that I realized that first of all, that Darren Aronofsky, the director, also directed The Fountain, which is a really good movie, but from a Buddhist point of view. And this is like the flood from a really Jewish point of view, bringing in lots of Jewish apocryphal texts and things,
his first movie was called Pi, like the mathematical symbol right? Pi, mm-hmm. And it's Kabbalistic, like Jewish pretty much.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing. So yeah,
he is always swinging for the fences, and he doesn't always get there. But I appreciate his trying. The interesting thing about this book is this movie, that it's been rattling around in his head since like 4th grade. And I don't know if you noticed in the movie, there's a moment where Russell Crowe's character Noah is going through the cities of men, and there's like a woman who comes out randomly. It's like, you, and she kind of points at him. That's Darren Aronofsky's 4th grade teacher. Like, he put her in the movie because she was the one who first gave him an assignment to analyze the Noah flood story in the Bible, and he's been pondering it ever since. So she has a cameo. I thought that was really interesting.
I mean, I say I love the Noah movie for all the wrong reasons, but I just absolutely love it. I'll watch it anytime pretty much, even though I think it's kind of a failure. But it's like you said, he swung for the fences. I mean, it was so amazing and everything. It's like, I think every time he had a choice to make, he sort of made the wrong choice, but did it in such a fascinating way that it was like still interesting. So
for you, it failed in sufficiently interesting ways.
Yes, it failed, but it kept failing in such great ways that it was like, okay, I got to just keep watching and see where it's going to go next. And so at the end, I was like, that was great. I got to watch it again. So.
Yeah, I liked that it didn't feel like the same Bible movie that you've seen before. It took liberties with the material, which made some people mad, but that also made it more interesting because it wasn't just like going through the rote, this is the Noah story, these are the beats it's going to hit, I already know. And it hits the beats in surprising ways. Like, you get to the end where Noah is drunk at the end. I was like, they incorporated that Noah's supposed to have invented wine. Like, I didn't know that was going to end up here. Like, it just looks
Well,
something else.
he's all over the place. I mean, he's incorporating stuff from like Book of Enoch, from Gnostic texts, from Kabbalah. I mean, he's like all over the place. I mean, he just sort of like grabbed everything and just threw it all in and mixed it up. And I mean, he changed a lot, like with the Watchers. I mean, that's straight from the Book of First Enoch, but it's not anything like really what's in the Book of First Enoch.
Yeah.
Other than, maybe there's a brief reference in the Book of First Enoch where it says the Watchers were punished and they were cast down. And the translation is different whether it's over or covered, whether they were put on top of or whether they were covered with rocks and veiled in darkness, which is supposed to be more like they were just sent to hell is what it is. But I mean, that idea, like where you take the translation where it says covered with rocks and veiled in darkness, that kind of works. But in the movie, they're punished for giving humans technology, whereas in Enoch, they give humans the weapons of war, but the real reason they're punished is because they had sex with a bunch of women and produced these horrible offspring that were, so it's like he took the idea of these fallen watcher angels, but then just went in a really different direction with it.
Yeah, for sure.
I actually find their story a part of that sort of subplot. One of the most compelling parts of the movie, these beings who had pity on fallen man and really got put through the ringer for defying the Creator. And it's interesting. I don't know if any of you noticed, like the word God never shows up in the entire movie. It's always the Creator. And the moment where they're fighting all the humans, and then the first angel dies and ascends to heaven, and the rest of them are like, our moment of redemption is here.
Oh.
And I liked the story of their hubris, their fall, but ultimately the Creator brings them home and redeems them. And I really liked that, even though it's weird that there are rock monsters talking to Noah. Whatever.
Yeah, and it's the turning point in the theme of the movie, right? Because up to this point, we have Noah descending more and more into justice and exacting revenge on humanity. And then it's at this point when it's like, oh, God is merciful. And then we lead into the point where Noah chooses mercy over justice. And then he sees that God accepts that.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a good point.
Well, yeah, I mean the whole thing with him being the Creator, that's almost. I mean, like I said, it's not. There's nothing in there that's straight. It's not straight Bible. It's not straight Kabbalah. It's not straight Gnostic. Like I've seen a lot of reviews where people are like, "Oh, it's preaching Gnosticism or whatever." It's like, well, he's borrowing a few ideas, but the idea of it being the Creator instead of God is actually straight from Gnosticism, where there is a big difference between God and the Creator. Like the Creator of the earth is a different being than God, who doesn't really do anything with physical matter. So I think that's actually borrowing from the Gnostic texts a lot. Some of the stuff with the Adam and Eve is also there too. But again, he's sort of like taking it, but then using it as raw material rather than sticking to it. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked how they kept returning to the Adam and Eve thing. That was something that worked really well with the visual medium, getting the little flashes of the Adam and Eve story in Cain and Abel. That it told you something without telling you. Like we didn't have to have a big monologue about, oh, man is fallen. It just would be like, oh, remember this? And it's nice to see a story that's taking advantage of its medium so well.
Right. Which is usually a point that people complain about. It's like, oh, this isn't the story as it is in the Bible, but you always have to adapt something. I mean, everybody loves like the Ten Commandments or Prince of Egypt, but those are very, very different takes on the same story from the Bible. And like in one of them, right, the conflict between Pharaoh and Moses is like hubris, and there's the woman who's involved in the Ten Commandments. And then in Prince of Egypt, it's more like a falling out between brothers, and both perfectly legitimate interpretations of the Exodus story, which doesn't have all that much detail in it. So you have to. I'm never one who thinks that like, oh, they didn't stick to the text. Well, you're gonna have to make adjustments, and I
There's not much text there, although,
right.
yeah, I read one interview with the screenwriter. He's like, oh, but we stuck to it as close as we could. But, you know,
Sort of.
even some of the stuff they changed, like in the
All right.
Bible, all of Noah's sons have wives. Like, that's actually one of the
Okay.
things, like, where I thought, like, whenever he makes a choice, he does something that, like, fails. Like, but, so in the movie, there's that one spot where I was like, okay, the son goes in, he finds that girl in the pit of bodies, gives her some food, they try to escape. And I get why the director.
You think for sure that that's going to be it? Oh, this is how it's going to
Like,
work
okay,
out.
so, because it's like, well, okay, yeah, I mean, there's so little in the text, they have to obviously expand. So there's very few times they actually flat out violate the text, but that's one of the times where they just flat out violate the text. You're like, okay, here's how at least one son's going to get his wife. Nope, we're going to kill her off so we can show that Noah's gone crazy.
But I think that works.
Well, to me, it was really interesting, but I still think it was a failure.
Yeah, it is a violation of the biblical text, but the reason it worked for me is because it is so shocking, because it's supposed to end up that way, and then the text stabs you in the back because you had these expectations.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I don't mind adding and even twisting things or giving a viewpoint, but for me, it was just like, no, I think they should have saved her just to stick as close as they could. But, that's just me. To me, it was just like, it was a failure, but it was a really interesting failure because thematically it highlighted a whole bunch of stuff. But at the same time, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess his two sons are going to have to marry their nieces. I don't know.
I think when you're doing an adaptation of a scriptural story, obviously you do have to change things. And it really depends on what your purpose is. Because we've seen like the church's Bible films, they're very careful to stick to only what's in the text, and the Book of Mormon ones. And I think they're trying to make something that can outlast whatever current interpretation you have, right?
Wow.
You want all the money you spent filming the New Testament and filming the Book of Mormon films, you want that to last for 30 years before you have to make another one. And if you include lots of interesting twists and interpretations, and then those don't age well.
Well, plus the church's videos are devotional. Noah was not a devotional work.
Yeah, and that's a different thing. Like, because then you have works of entertainment that are still devotional. Like, you could argue that the Ten Commandments is still supposed to be pretty devotional, and something like The Chosen, right? The Chosen takes a lot of liberties, but it still has to stay true to the Bible story because it is trying to be a faith promoting one.
Yeah, The Chosen's kind of like in that half thing between devotional and entertainment, whereas Noah just went for entertainment. It just like went, I'm just going to go straight up, rock your world with special effects and just have really cool battle scenes and not even care about the devotional stuff, which is fine. I mean, if that's what your vision is and the muse tells you to do, then go for it.
I'm gonna disagree with your assessment that the spectrum is between entertainment and devotional. Like one of the reasons I really
so go ahead
enjoy this movie is because he's really trying to ask some good questions, and one of the questions is man worth saving? And because he doesn't want the creator to be like a character who's like walking and talking or whatever, he has to put that theme, that decision in Noah's hands, and that leads to some of the decisions he makes about the different wives and the fact that Elah is barren, at least for first 2/3 of the movie, so that we can ask the question: is mankind worth saving? And that's not devotional, but It's not strictly entertainment either. He's meditating on that question: is man worth saving? Well, and I find that it's a deeply fascinating cinematic meditation.
It's not mindless entertainment. I mean, there's mindless entertainment. Sure. I mean, for me, devotional, it's like something that's meant to increase faith and increase your devotion to a particular thing. Whereas Noah, he's trying to get you to think about stuff, but he's not necessarily trying to get you to be more Kabbalistic or anything,
Yeah.
Sure.
True. But I feel like this movie really captured. Often when we read the Old Testament, we're kind of upset about lots of people get destroyed in the Old Testament over and over and over. We have the flood, we have Sodom and Gomorrah, we have the Israelites destroying all the Canaanites. We have lots of mass murder. And I think one of the things that this film really accomplished is just show, like, to really make you feel, I want these people to be destroyed. Like, this is bad.
See, to me, it
really makes you viscerally feel that in a way that you don't when you read the Bible.
See, to me, that's one of the more interesting failures of the movie, is that I don't think it establishes that enough in the sense that, like, other than the brief visit Noah has to the encampment outside, I mean, what I really wanted to see, honestly, was more world building in the beginning of the movie. I mean, we spent so much time in just the desolate wastes, which I can get why he chose that, because he's trying to more focus on Noah and how it was appearing to Noah and his family. But other than that brief CGI globe covering where it shows all the cities sort of popping up, we don't actually get a real good sense of just how depraved, how wicked, how much awful the cities are, how much strip mining is really going on. We really needed to have like some scenes and some just, you know, huge empire, city towers, skyscrapers, whatever. You know, I just feels like it's sort of like off screen, all this bad stuff's happening. We never really see it until about halfway through the movie. We get a brief little glimpse of it. And then I was like, man, I just really wanted more evil, honestly. They needed to be more evil, and there needed to be more. There wasn't enough, to me, enough world buildings.
I don't know. I thought his visit to the camp was pretty traumatic, where you realize, you know, they're selling children for food.
Well, yeah. But that's like halfway through the movie.
The cannibalism aspect is pretty brutal.
And I wanted that like earlier, because other than that, up to that point, you really only had Noah's word for it, and he wasn't really other than some raiders, basically, which, you know, in any post-apocalyptic wasteland, which is basically what they're wandering around in, you're going to run across raiders, and that doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the world's awful. So it's just like, I just would have wanted that earlier in the film, like instead of just a brief CGI cities popping up on a map, like actually have one of those cities and all its, you know, whatever, gothic or grandiose or whatever, dark beauty or majesty or whatever. It just wasn't there. And I just
it
felt
could have been
time,
like where he finds his wife. That's what I was wondering about half the movie. I was like, where did Noah find his wife if everybody's like evil?
That's true. A fair point.
That could have been a place to put it.
But interesting to me, because also I think the character of Tubal-Cain is not like a scene-chewing, totally evil, depraved bad guy. Like there's some hints of Ray Winston plays him sympathetic enough, like you kind of see his point of view, like the moment where he prays to God and says, "Am I not a man made in your image? Why won't you speak to me?" Like there's some interesting stuff going on with that character as well. That nuances the whole how evil are people, or to what extent are they completely, you know, to use the Calvinist term, like totally depraved. Anyway, I like the character of Tubal-Cain as a foil for a lot of Noah's sort of philosophy and things.
Yeah, no, he was very well acted. I mean, I'd like to think like Nick Nolte did one of the voices for the rock monsters. One of the rock angels. Like if he'd done that thing, he would have just been chewing the scenery, and it would have been like, you know, because that's how he does bad guys. And so I was thinking of that, like if Nick Nolte had been playing Tubal-Cain, then it would have just been completely that there, you know, there was much more ambiguity in the performance we do have. So anyway, just a thought I had. But
so getting back to the question of like adaptation of biblical stories, one question that I had as I watched the movie was, would I show this to my kids? Definitely not the younger kids. It's a little too violent for them. But I was wondering how it plays as a movie to kind of embody the story to them, because a lot of times reading the scriptures can be kind of dry for kids. But on the other hand, sometimes when you show them a movie version that doesn't really match the scriptures, the movie version sticks and the scripture version doesn't. There was a girl in my ward growing up who had seen the Living Scriptures version of The Prodigal Son, and we had an argument for about 10 minutes in Sunday school about who saw him first, and it was the dog. She was sure it was the dog. And I was like, there's no dog in the scriptures. There's not.
Well, that's that.
So sometimes depending on how young they are, like these details that are in the adaptation stick and are more important.
The one thing I thought it got really right that was just dead on was actually how the ark looked. I mean, in the movie, the ark was basically a giant box. You know, usually you see like the ship with a rudder, and it's got like, you know, and it's curved in the ends. And this one is like, no, it's a box, because that's how it's in the scriptures. If you actually look at how it's described and the directions the Lord gives to Noah, it's a box. It's a big box, because the idea is this is just going to be, water coming from the sky, water coming from the ground. It's all violent. All they can do is just get in the box and wait it out. They're not going to be sailing. They're just going to be trying to survive the primordial chaos being unleashed on the world again. And that's exactly what it is in the scriptures. And so the movie actually really, when I saw the actual design of the ark, I was like, finally, there's actually a movie that gets the arch design right. Everybody else wants to draw it like a boat,
Right.
That is interesting.
Which is, yeah.
I thought a good element of world building was having the watchers building it with them, because it seems like it would be really hard to build something that big with just, 6 people, 8 people.
Right. It's easy to strip a tree when you're a rock monster. You just go.
Yeah.
Yep.
I thought the rock monsters were the coolest thing, but yeah,
really
I love the rock monsters.
Yeah.
So
they were the best part.
To answer your question, Liz, about would I show it to my kids? It kind of goes back to the question about like what is the nature of this movie, the devotional entertainment spectrum. I think it's a thinking movie. I don't know that I would substitute it for a devotional approach in any way, shape, or form. But I also think like there's some pretty serious themes here, and I would want them to be old and mature enough to understand those themes. Like, and I don't think that's something that your average 12-year-old is really going to quite be ready for. I mean, the rock monsters would be cool. There are some glowing rocks and stuff, but like the part at the end where he's about to murder his 2 granddaughters, like this is some heavy stuff, and I would want someone to be emotionally mature enough to handle the questions that Aronofsky is asking of us through this movie, because they are not easily answered or questions that broker simple responses.
Yeah, I mean, he's pulling in, right, the Abraham and Isaac story at that point, right? It's very much like, and that's a question that has stumped philosophers for a long time. People have written books and books and books on how does this work with the way we understand God? How can we worship a God who would ask this?
I have a son named Noah, just in case.
Me too.
So, but like I found, like we agonized over that name for months, honestly, and then we finally chose it, and then we started noticing like everybody in his grade is named Noah too, and it's like it was the most popular baby name for boys for like 5 years in a row.
Yeah. Came around again. Well, at least it's a good name in the year when you're studying the Old Testament. When you study Book of Mormon, then it's not a great name.
Yeah, well, when he was like 2 or 3 years old, he was convinced he was actually the biblical Noah, because he used to say like a long time ago when I built that boat, he'd actually say that. And we were like, that's awesome. Okay.
Well, there's one way to liken the scriptures unto yourself, right?
Yeah.
Right. That goes back to
I don't know if it's
that goes back to the fountain and reincarnation and stuff. That's a different movie.
That's a whole different thing.
Yeah, we're like, maybe he was reincarnated. You never know. Yeah, let's not get into that. But yeah, like with the kids, I'd probably wait till they were older. I mean, it would just depend on the kid too. Like if the kid was 12 and seemed to be able to take it, I'd probably do it, let him watch it, and just. Sure. But I make sure I talk with him. Like,
yeah, I think
that's the one thing I try to do. Like my dad was absolutely amazing about. Always, like every movie we saw, even something like Over the Top by Sylvester Stallone, which is an arm wrestling movie that's obscure. Like my dad would talk with us about it afterwards and be like, well, what did you learn from this? And what did they do? And what did we, and so, I always make sure you don't just show it to them, but just ask them questions like, what's going on? What do you think about this? Did this make any sense?
Yeah, I agree.
Dad is having those questions about Over the Top. You have a good dad there, Ivan. That's great. That's a weird movie too, but it's fun.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I feel like that's where a lot of people who are very offended or stressed about movies like Noah come at it from the perspective of the movie has to stand all on its own and we don't talk about it at all. And if that doesn't convey what I want it to convey, then it's a bad movie. Okay, so one thing that's interesting in the movie is where they have Methuselah, and there's kind of this concept of priesthood and power that he has. It's really interesting. What was you guys' thoughts on the portrayal of his power in the movie?
Well, like I said earlier, the review, that it's a great setting for Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, that's basically what it was. It was magic. I mean, we had the whole the snake shed its skin, which I found one of the screenwriters saying for them that was like the moment they kept that in there because like that's the moment the snake goes to the side of evil, so it sheds its good side and
Oh.
leaves it behind and goes on as the evil serpent. And so, like in the movie, you even see like one of the Adam and Eve figures bows down to touch it when they're still in their uncorrupted state. So it's like they're all glowy beings and stuff. And so, which probably has to do with the Zohar, which is the mineral, which it comes is a glowy thing in the Bible. It's like when it talks about brightness in a couple spots, it's like it's also the name of a Kabbalistic text about being enlightened and moving on. So, it touches the skin, so it's like the goods part. This good skin, which was touched by a magical being, is imbued with this magical power, and so it'd be like some sort of like in Dungeons and Dragons, it'd be one of those rare artifacts or something you'd track down
Gives
or
you
whatever.
power.
But
Sure. And the fact they would take the snake skin and wrap it around their hands, I think, is a pretty clear reference to Jewish tefillin. Um, and I don't think Darren Aronofsky is. I'm pretty sure he's not Orthodox Jewish.
I think he's more agnostic from what I've read.
Well, yeah, sure, but I mean, you could be agnostic and
You
still
could be
be.
agnostic Jewish. That's a thing.
Well, yeah, that's what
Right.
Harold Bloom said he was. I remember when Harold Bloom was like, "I can't judge Joseph Smith because I'm an agnostic Jew." But
Right. He's certainly, if he were of the three major camps, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Aronofsky would clearly fall into the Reform tradition. And you can be a Reform agnostic Jew. I think that's fair. But the idea of the snake skin as an artifact passed down, referencing this very specific practice that Orthodox Jews do when they wrap these things around them as part of their prayers. I thought that was touching. I liked it. It's sort of again, that's why I described this as like a very Jewish take on the Noah story. That was one of the most clear Jewish elements to me.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I thought the glowing rocks were super interesting. I have never read through First Enoch, but I started reading through it at your guys' recommendation. And yeah, you find in there they have glowing rocks and they use them to light the ark. And it's, from a Mormon perspective, very much like brother of Jared and lighting the barges with the glowing rocks. So that's an interesting connection.
The first time I saw the movie, that was something I instantly went home and pulled out one of my Hugh Nibley books and kind of flipped through it until I found.
Of course, Hugh Nibley has something about it.
Of course, yeah, and he makes that very point that like there are these weird, strange, glowing rocks in Noah's Ark, and when the brother of Jared does that same thing, there are more than a few parallels going on there. So, I mean, everybody accuses Hugh Nibley of parallelomania, and maybe some of that, is rightfully, justified. But it's an interesting parallel nonetheless. and I was amused by that, and I was like, I was probably the only person in that theater in Bethesda, Maryland, who's like, I know exactly what's going on here. This is amazing.
Well, like actually, in the footnotes of our church's scriptures of the Bible, it's something I saw when I was a kid. It said. In the footnote, when I talked about the window in the ark, there's a footnote that says some rabbis believe this was a glowing stone. Like that's actually in the footnotes in our scriptures. And so, when I was older and I actually checked, there's it's a minor tradition, but there's a definite. But I mean, a lot of stuff he takes from, like I said, Zohar is the name of a Jewish Kabbalistic text about being enlightened. So Zohar is also a term that means like brightness in the Hebrew Bible. But even things like Methuselah's magic sword. That's from rabbinical commentary. There's a rabbi that wrote about Methuselah having, although in there he talks about Methuselah having a demon slaying sword rather than like one of fire that can wipe out humans, but it's still the same idea of like having this mystical sword that Methuselah had that doesn't really show up anywhere in the Bible, but is in a lot of midrash.
So the one I read on that was I found that in my rewatch in preparation for the podcast, I'm like, what's going on with the sword? And I went and looked it up. There's at least I don't have the reference in front of me, but like a 1918 translation called like The Legends of the Jews. Methuselah was granted the flaming sword from Eden for a little while. That's what that is, I think, supposed to be. I'm
That's
like,
probably the flaming part.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I love the part where he just wipes out the entire army. I'm like, wow.
I'm like,
Anyway,
why didn't they use that? I guess he must have taken it back. It's like, why didn't they use that when the
Earlier.
army was storming the
they're storming
rock
the
monster
Ark.
gate?
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway,
but
but it's there in various Jewish, I don't know, again, pseudepigraphal texts, sort of like First Enoch, but I guess even more obscure is that Methuselah gets to wield that sword slash lightsaber for
Yeah,
for a
what?
period of time at least, and it's kind
yeah,
of fun that he threw it in the movie for 5 seconds.
Yeah. It's really neat to think about all of these expansions on the biblical text because they are really, really short when you think about it. And so sometimes it's fun to get into these interesting asides and accuracy, maybe not, but it's still interesting, I think.
yeah. I mean, with Noah, he just decided, like, I'm going to go full on epic fantasy here,
Hmm.
and I mean, like with the Chosen, which you mentioned earlier, they're trying to more like everything we're doing is within the realm of historical plausibility. Like, it probably may not have happened this way, but I've seen people complain in the Chosen, for example, that they've got Matthew writing everything down, and so they're like, that's a fundamentalist thing that the Gospels are completely reliable or whatever. Well, yeah, it kind of is. But at the same time, Matthew's a tax collector. He knew how to read and write. He could have afforded writing materials. It's within the realm of historical plausibility. So while it may not necessarily be even what happened or close to what happened, it's still plausible. Whereas, Aronofsky was like, just like rock monsters, flaming, I mean, it's all just epic fantasy. It's like the Lord of the Rings, but the Bible. So it's great. And that's,
Yeah,
it's
erring on the
wonderfully
side of
entertaining.
awesome.
Yeah. That's what it's the rule of cool.
Yep.
I was about to say that exact thing. It's the rule of cool from Dungeons and Dragons. Is this going to make
Yeah.
it better? Throw it in.
Do it. Do it.
Yeah. The
All
Nibley
right.
reference is I went and looked it up. It's chapter 26 of An Approach to the Book of Mormon. The title is Strange Ships and Shining Stones, a Not So Fantastic Story, where he talks about the Jaredite barges and does a lot of the parallels to various ancient stories, including the stuff from the Book of Enoch, like we've been talking about. So that was, if anybody wants to go look that up on their own, it's available on the Maxwell Institute's website.
Okay, cool. I always love myself some Hugh Nibley, so it's always interesting to see what he's found.
Got some good stuff.
Yep.
Some dated stuff, but it's all good, even if it's dated.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like Jonathan Green over at Times and Seasons blog said, like, even Hugh Nibley himself, if he were alive today, would expect a lot of his stuff was out of date because
Yeah.
he wasn't saying he was the final word. He was just saying, with what we know now, this is what I've come up with. So,
Yeah.
For sure. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything. So we're going to close by doing some ratings. Our first rating is for content. Celestial, Telestial, Terrestrial, Outer Darkness. Where would you place this movie?
So I'll go first. I'm going to put this in the Celestial because I feel like the moments of violence or the objectionable material is placed there very deliberately to serve a purpose in the story, and I don't find that kind of material actually objectionable. But it does need to be taken seriously, and just be aware that it is a PG-13 movie, but it's not gratuitously so. So I didn't think there was any moment that I was like, oh, that was just thrown in there just to have some violence.
Okay.
I liked
Okay.
the whole thing.
To say, I was going to go terrestrial, but like when the moon is full, it's the glory of the moon. Like, so full moon, terrestrial. But, I pretty much agree with everything Carl just said. So I don't know, maybe lower degree of that. To me, it's like I said, I consider it an absolutely fascinating failure. So to me, like every time there's a choice, he makes the wrong choice, but does it so interestingly. So to me, it's not quite celestial because I just don't think it succeeds. But I just I love watching it. So, to me, that's
Yeah, I mean, if you understand what's going on in the biblical text, it's pretty violent and
Mhm.
pretty scary. So you could make that argument that it's definitely where it needs to be to portray that kind of story.
Right. And I got to say, Ivan, you've said several times now, and I even used the phrase like it failed sufficiently interesting. I got to say on the rewatch, my opinion of it has changed. I think it succeeds more than it fails. But that was not my initial reaction when I watched it first in the theaters. So that's
Well,
interesting. It stands up to rewatch, at least for me.
Oh, I'd rewatch it in
yeah,
a
going
second.
on that, let's talk about the artistic merit. Where would you rate it 1 to 5 popcorn balls?
Oh
5.
yeah, 5 easy.
I
It's
agree. I agree.
and there's a couple CGI spots that aren't like perfect, that are a little obviously, but other than that, I mean, it's amazingly directed, and it's, technical, on a technical level, it's great. And yeah,
Yeah.
artistically, I mean,
I mean,
he's pouring his heart and soul into it, and he's following the muse wherever it's going to take him. So yeah,
and it's got
Yeah.
just such a well-crafted message
yeah,
throughout, right? It's not like just the message is incidental to the story. It's like this was crafted to say something about justice and mercy. And you can tell that he's thought about it, and it's a complex message, not a one-note message. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, gospel connections, where would you put that on a 1 to 5 apricots?
hmm.
And what you can learn from the movie. I mean, I don't think it's a devotional movie, as we've discussed, by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have some serious thought in it about moral issues.
Yeah, that was a hard one to think. I still haven't quite figured out where I'd put that one. I guess I'll probably put it like a 4, just because. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a great conversation starter. So even though, I think, like I said, a fascinating failure as a movie, I think it would be actually a really great movie for, with the right crowd, to actually really get into some seriously interesting discussions. So
Yeah. I would agree with a 4 as well, because I think it would create seriously interesting discussions. But part of those discussions is the fact that large chunks of it are kind of not morally edifying, like and in interesting ways though, and it presents again this question, like the moment where Noah goes to the camp, and there's just a little. It's almost a cameo of himself. Like they got Russell Crowe. He looks at one of the guys who's there, like eating animals and selling children and doing all these horrible, terrible things. And the person looks at him, and it's himself. And so he's trying. Aronofsky is trying to talk about, almost the question for Noah: am I worth saving? And that is an interesting and sort of a dark view of that question. Is mankind worth saving? A very personalized version of that. I don't know if that question is a morally edifying question, but it's certainly a very morally interesting question, and so that's why I with Ivan would land on 4 apricots.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a strong 4. I got to agree with you guys as well. So,
I think this is the
definitely a
first time
movie
we've
worth
had
watching.
like absolute consensus. Well,
okay, I'm going to
consensus
change to
on
3 just to
just to shake it up.
just to shake it up. It's okay.
Oh, it's okay. I thought it was really fun. I was very impressed with the movie. I hadn't seen it before, so I thought it was great. And this has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree. Oh, I forgot. Never mind. I got to do where you can find us, actually. Hold on. So you can find my writing on lizbusby.com. Carl, where can we find you?
I'm just on Facebook. You're welcome to friend me and participate in conversations there. I try to run a pretty tight ship with lots of different people from different walks of life, and we've had some good conversations this very week. So it's you're always welcome to come and hang out and argue with me politely there.
And Ivan, where can we find you?
If you have somebody going to Arizona State University that's like a freshman or sophomore, they can take writing classes from me. Other than that, I used to be online on a blog, but I'm not going to go into that issue. So maybe at some point I will find somewhere that's a home base, but right now I don't really have one. So
Sounds good. And this has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. See you next time.